Anyway, I want to welcome you all to Wagner College. This is about our 7th or 8th year of the Presidential Economic Summit. And during that period of time, we've had some really good speakers. And I want to thank President Garassi for handing that role to me. And I want to thank Dick Grasso for bringing a dear friend of mine, a colleague, and bringing some really incredible speakers to campus, including our featured speaker tonight, Pataki. Some of the things that you may or may not know about Wagner, the changes that we're making over the past several years. We're a small school, we're a niche school. We want to stay ahead of our competition. We've put in many, many innovative programs. We have the capstone simulation, which is a standalone in New York City. We have offered Lean Six Sigma Greenbelt options to our executive MBA program. And through a gift from Richard Grasso, we have now turned one of our areas in our second floor of Campus Hall that Dr. LeRae, who was chair before myself, had enclosed. And we've turned it into a state-of-the-art boardroom that's as nice as any place you'll find in New York City. Interactive whiteboard, hidden air conditioning behind the walls. You can't see it here, so it's quiet. Beautiful table. That's going to be the home of our new accelerated MBA program. That's going to be the new home of our existing accelerated MBA program. Our hand-picked group of 12 or 15 students that go on to do very well afterwards. And that also will be the home for our MS in accounting in the evening program and some of our traditional MBA classes and our finance club. So we welcome you to come over to the second floor of Campus Hall and see that at any time. Just send me an email and we can go from there. So that's the other thing. Now, I want to touch on a couple of the students that we have here tonight. We run this capstone simulation every year, and it's a competitive program where students run a worldwide corporation over an 8-year period in teams. They have to run first shift, second shift, accounting, marketing, management, you name it. I can throw in labor negotiations, I can throw in recessions. And it's on a competitive curve. And I'm not an easy boss, as I will tell you. But I have to mention, in particular this year, normally they go through the semester and their stock price, which is one of the things they're graded on, their stock price, their market capitalization, balance, scorecard, and such. A good team would have a stock price of about 180. And they start out at $34 where they run this international company of electronic sensors. This year we had a head-to-head battle going between two teams, Erie and Chester. And some of those students are here tonight. Anthony from Fredo was on the Chester team, in the lead all the way. And we have a team made up, and it's a tribute to Wagner. On this team, we have 5 people. We have 3 African Americans, 3 athletes, and a young lady from France. One of those people on the team is an academic All-American, Trevor Loveland, one of only 43 in the whole country. That team, their stock price at the end of the game, remember I told you about 180 is really, really good, was $412. They amassed a total market capitalization of over $1 billion, where $500 million would be a big deal. But what I'm most proud of, and on that team is Matilda Lutino, Tony Jones, Trevor Loveland, Evan Adossier, and Ian Cunningham. They came in 3rd in the world. In the world. This program is done all around the world by Capson in Chicago in profitability in their 8th round. So I can't tell you how proud I am, and this is a continuing progress of what we do. In our accelerated program, some of our alumni keep giving back. One, Kevin Kettleson, a Delta Nu brother, which I am, to the death, has put us in touch with a company called Trading Technologies. Wagner College will be the first school in New York City that will have a live trading platform for commodities, foreign exchange, and stocks that they'll be able to run. And one of our trustees, Cesar Baez, is going to be coming back and putting together a seminar which will turn into a program that we can teach to. It will be an invited program. The students will have to interview for a spot to get into this classroom. And this classroom in the Grasso boardroom has all been made a reality by Richard Grasso. So I'd like to just give you a hand. I think that getting together here, we get some of our people that have gone to Wagner. I've met some wonderful people here that have gone here. They tell me, oh, I'm an old timer. I went here 30 years ago. I tell them that in my office, where our office is the business department in Campus Hall, that in 2015, it'll be 50 years ago that I was a freshman in that dormitory. So when you get here, they just don't let you go. And there's a reason why. And somebody said, you know, Wagner's happy to have you. Well, you know what? I owe to Wagner what I've done in my life, and I love being here. And keep it short, because I know we want to hear the real speakers. I'd like to introduce Dr. Garassi on behalf of all the trustees that are here, Diane Powers, and Richard Grasso, and anybody else I might have missed. I'm sorry. Fred Williamson, a good friend of mine, even though he was an alpha brother. And I'll turn it over to Richard Grasso, President Grasso.
Thank you, Don. Don has done an exceptional job with the business department, as does the whole faculty of the business department. He came to us as an alum from Wall Street, 25 plus years on Wall Street, very successful with all major firms, and it's really a treasure to our students to have someone leading the department who's so grounded in the everyday realities of finance and equity and the like. So we're really quite pleased that Don has assumed the leadership of the department. Tonight we're really quite honored to have our former governor speak with us tonight about domestic issues around economic development and the global economy. And these issues are rather profound. We could spend a lot of time talking about the success of the governor in his years leading the state, but I would be neglectful if I didn't point out that so many of the markers of his administration rebound around economic revitalization of the state of New York through the use of effective tax cuts, job creation, and the like, and a particular emphasis on biotechnology and centers of real growth and imagination that have really spurred the state most recently in terms of innovation in our nanotechnology and the like. So we're very, very pleased that he can speak to some of those issues, but also, and this is really important for Staten Islanders and all New Yorkers, Governor Pataki was at the helm in a very critical way in the recovery from 9/11. Those of you who were not at Wagner or not living on Staten Island or not living in New York during that period, it's hard to imagine the depth of that scar, both in our personal lives, many losses, many folks close to us, in your own personal lives, those in the audience, but to the city and the state, the nation. And it took strong leadership at many levels, and particularly the governor's level, to insist that we rebuild and rebuild strong in downtown New York. And Governor Pataki, through the New York State Economic Development Corporation, really insisted that we make an effort there. And it's, as you know, if you pass by the site now, it's come back to be something that's quite praiseworthy for the city and for the nation. And he led us through those difficult times, along with two mayors. And then, of course, one of his real passions has been environmental protection. The governor has done a lot in the state in terms of the preservation of open spaces. And I can tell you, I know personally from some friends who've been involved in Westchester County with the preservation of open spaces. His commitment to that really is deep within his soul and his heart. He's a native Hudson River person, and he has a deep commitment, as so many people who live on the river do, to the natural world and the preservation of the environment. So we're so pleased to have Governor Pataki here. He'll speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll do some question and answers. We'll have microphones in the audience. We'll put the lights up at that point again. But I'm so pleased, and thank you, Governor Pataki. It's a treat for Wagner to have you here.
Tall, so let me raise this. President Garassi, thank you for your kind words, and I'll tell you, I had a chance to have dinner with the president earlier, and Wagner is very fortunate to have someone who has the talent and the passion for this school that he does. President Garassi, thank you. Thank you as well for your optimism. And I too have to join in thanking my friend Dick Grasso for being such a great friend to Wagner, as well as a personal friend of mine. And, you know, I'm sure, Mr. President, you think you deserve the credit. It's actually his daughter, Katie, who went to Wagner, who deserves all the credit for Dick's passion for this great university. I'm afraid tonight I'm going to be a little bit serious. And I usually try not to be. I managed to avoid politics for the last almost 8 years by and large. But I really do think we're at an important point in our country's history. And there are a lot of issues that have a profound impact on the global economy, of course, but more importantly to me, on the lives of Americans that are not being properly reserved. First, let me say, it's great to be back on Staten Island. And whenever I come here, I think back to the Sunday night before my first election in 1994 when I was running for governor. That morning, the Daily News straw poll came out showing me behind by 17 points. And if ever you wake up with a less than joyful feeling, it's after a year of campaigning, waking up and being asked by a reporter, how does it feel to be so far behind with 2 days to go? But I had a great team, a lot of supporters, and that evening I was coming to Staten Island. And I got on the ferry, and it was a beautiful evening, and we were coming to a rally. Leticia Romero was probably the organizer of the rally. Thank you, Leticia, for always having been there. And as we're crossing the harbor, it's evening, twilight, and I look out and see the Statue of Liberty. And I'm kind of a hokey guy anyway. But we're going past the statue. It's 2 nights before the election, and I'm thinking of my 4 grandparents, all of whom emigrated and came to America, all of whom believed in this country, 3 of whom couldn't speak a word of English, not just when they got here, but for most of their lives. My grandmother from Ireland, who had such a thick brogue that even when she was speaking English, no one could understand it. We're coming across on the ferry, and I think, my goodness, my 4 grandparents, 3 of them couldn't speak English, and here I am, their grandson, just a couple of decades later, having the privilege and the opportunity to run for governor of the greatest state in the Union. Yeah, I might not win, but maybe I will. And America is not just about winning or losing. It's about having the opportunity to try, whether you succeed or you fall short. And I couldn't help but get a tear in my eye out of a sense of gratitude for this country and to those 4 grandparents for having made the wise decision to pick up from their homelands, to leave their families behind who they would never see again, to come to this great country. And it's something that has stuck with me my entire life, that regardless of where you're from, regardless of your religion or the language you spoke in your older country or the color of your skin, this country has always represented opportunity. It has represented the best in the world. And we have always put aside those old world differences and stood together shoulder and shoulder as Americans. And President Garassi mentioned September 11th. And another thought I always have whenever I come to Staten Island is in the days and weeks and months after those horrible attacks coming here to attend the funerals of so many brave heroes who died that day. And seeing in the people, yes, this tremendous sense of loss, this tremendous sense of sorrow, but at the same time, this sense of unity and this sense of resolve. Didn't matter if you were Republican, Democrat, black, white, rich, poor. We were all New Yorkers. We were all Americans. We had all been attacked. We're going to stand together and work together to build a better future and overcome those who hate the freedoms that we held and still hold so dear. That was then. Think about today. Think about Washington in April of 2014. Today, Congress's approval rating is somewhere between 8 and 10. The American people, for the first time in generations and maybe longer, when they're asked if you think the best of America is ahead or behind us, will say it's behind us. If you ask people today, are your children going to live a better life than you did? A majority for the first time say they don't think our kids and grandchildren are going to live better lives. How can that be in this country? This is still the greatest country in the world, and I'll tell you why I think that is the case. It's not a failing of the people. It's not a failing of our courage, our strength, our vision, our willingness to work hard and take risks. It's a failing of politics. It's a failing of government. And I have this, thank you. And it's one thing to say we're failing because of bad politics. It's another thing to solve the problem. And I have a little easel here, and I'm just going to take a few minutes to draw a chart laying out what I think has happened in politics in this country and what is wrong from a political standpoint, and then try to talk about some of the solutions. And I think you can hear me without a microphone, but if you turn on the TV or listen to the media, they'll tell you how America is so brutally divided, how it's 50 on this side and 50 on the other side, they all hate each other. Well, that's not true. Let me just outline the numbers that have held true in this country for at least the last 50 years. When you break down American politics to liberal, moderate, conservative, it has consistently been, for 50 years, about 20% of Americans consider themselves liberal. Now that changes, it could be 18, it could be 22. It's obviously very different in New York State. About 40% consider themselves moderate. About 40%, more or less back and forth, consider themselves conservative. There is a broad consensus among the American people somewhere in this part of the political spectrum. And among those who consider themselves liberal or conservative, a very small percentage consider themselves to be very conservative or very liberal. The American people still believe in this country and still believe in each other, even if we don't necessarily agree on political solutions. So what has happened? Why is Congress's approval rating at 8%? Let me tell you my thought on it. When you look at the partisan breakdown, the Republican Party largely represents a graph like this. A few liberals, quite a few moderates, more conservatives, and some arch conservatives. This is the Republican Party. When you look at the Democratic Party, it's essentially the opposite. Many liberals, a lot of moderates, and a handful of conservatives. Now that's okay, because the consensus is still in the middle. You would think both parties would understand, well, this is our party base, this is our party base, but the votes are here, and we will solve problems and work together. The problem, in my view, is the selection of the candidates. Right now, the candidates are chosen in primaries. Very few people vote in those primaries. The political system, the conventions that gave us Abe Lincoln or Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Teddy Roosevelt or Dwight Eisenhower, those were smoke-filled rooms. Those were no good. We had to have primaries. Well, in the average primary, less than 20% of the registered voters in a party vote. So if you're running in a Republican Party, who is going to be choosing the candidate? It's not going to be this broad spectrum. It's going to be this group, the most ideological, the most partisan, and the most self-interested members of the party choose the candidate. And it's the same thing on the Democratic side. Who's going to choose the candidate? It is the most ideological and the most partisan who choose the candidate. So you get to an election, and you have a choice between this and this, when the majority of the people are here. And let me just give you one example, and I don't mean to take a personal shot at him, but Bill de Blasio, take a guess of what percentage of adult eligible voters he got to become the Democratic nominee in this city. Less than 4%. He got 40% of the 20% of the Democrats who came out to vote. And you know how hot that primary was. Only 20% of registered Democrats voted. He got 8% of registered Democrats. And registered Democrats are well less than half the eligible adult voting population in New York City. So with less than 4% of the eligible vote, he becomes the nominee. And because this is a one-party city, by and large, and the Republican, it doesn't matter where they are, he is now the mayor of New York City. And it's the same thing on the other side. You go to Texas right now, and the battle is not over the nominee coming from here or here. The battle is whether the nominee comes from here and here, because the election is largely irrelevant in a one-party state. So too often, the nominee comes from here. So you go to Washington today. Why do they not solve problems? Why are they held in such disrespect? Why do we have such finger pointing instead of problem solving? And it's because the elected officials come from here in both parties, and we lurch from one failed blindly ideological approach to problem solving to another. And so that, to me, is the nature of our political problem that is causing so much concern about the future of the country, in a country where the American people still believe in the country, still believe in each other, and still have every reason to believe in a bright future. So what do we do about it? Well, this is an economics forum, not a political forum. Let me just touch on two issues that I think we hear about today. One is the income inequality. Now, when I hear Washington talking about these issues, I fear too often it's not because of a sincere belief that this is an issue that requires us to sit down together and try to come to a solution, but there's a political advantage. And what happens is, instead of coming up with intelligent solutions that bring people together, you demonize the 1%. Oh, it's wrong that people are successful. Well, in my lifetime, I had never heard before that success is a bad thing in America. But you hear it too often now. Now, on the other side, you hear, oh, there's no real income inequality. That doesn't really exist. If people just worked harder, everything would be fine. Well, the truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. I am very concerned, as a conservative Republican, about the weakness of the middle class and the still weakening middle class in this country. Let me just give you a couple of statistics. In 1986, the average hourly wage for a worker was $8.80. In 2013, adjusted for inflation, the average hourly pay for a worker is $8.88. In 28 years, the average pay of people's wages has gone up 1%. And by the way, over the last 4 years, it's actually gone down over 2%. So when you hear people saying we're not out of the recession, the economy is not recovering, the economists will all tell you we are, but people aren't seeing it and people aren't feeling it. So what do we do about that? We can just point fingers, demonize the 1%, or we can claim the problem doesn't exist. But I'll tell you, as someone whose grandparents virtually all worked in factories and understood that that was the way to give their children and grandchildren a better life, that's not good enough. So as Americans, what we should do is sit down and not point fingers, but solve problems. Let me just give you 3 examples why income inequality, in my view, is a serious issue and what we can do about it. The first is the breakdown of the family. This is something that has tragic social and economic consequences. If you are raised in a single-parent family, you are 20% likely to live in long-term poverty. If you have 2 parents raising you, the number is 2%. You are 10 times more likely to be trapped in poverty for your whole lifetime in a single family, in a single-parent family. And what has happened to our families? In 1960, another statistic here, 76% of African American families had both a mother and a father present, 2 parents. 97% of white families had 2 parents. In 2012, 30% of African American families had 2 parents, and 70% of white families. Now, I'm not in any way disparaging the tremendous effort that single parents, particularly single mothers, make. But we do have to understand that when you talk about income inequality, part of it is if you are trapped in a single parent family, then you are not going to, in all likelihood, have the economic opportunity of someone who is raised with 2 parents. And we as a society should look to see what we can do, not by pointing fingers, not in a partisan way, not by trying to impose an ideological solution, but how can we strengthen the American family for the benefit of every one of us? And by the way, just how stupid is it that if you get married, you get subject to a marriage penalty tax where your taxes are higher than if you don't? There are solutions. There are solutions that will strengthen the family that don't require us to demonize anybody, and in the process take a step towards ending that too great income inequality. The second point I'd make is education and schools. How criminal is it that we send poor kids, often minority African American kids, to monopoly public schools where we know year after year after year that school cannot teach that child. The school is failing by any objective standard, and we expect that child to have the same opportunity of someone growing up and going to a great public school. It's not fair. And Abraham Lincoln said what this society should be all about is giving everybody a fair chance. We don't give poor minority children a fair chance when we demand they go to a monopoly school that fails them year in and year out. We have to understand that one of the most important civil rights of the 21st century should be the right of every child, poor or rich, white or black, to go to a public school where the teachers can teach, the schools can educate, and that child will have a fair chance. And we should look to put in place policies that achieve that for every single student. Now, the third point I would make is, yes, we have income inequality, but we also have inequality of job opportunities. We aren't generating the jobs that this country has always generated. We need, what do you need? What's the best social program? Since, in the last, I think it's 7 years, 11 million working age adult Americans have dropped out of the workforce. They're not even looking for a job. They're not disabled, they're not senior citizens, they're not in any way incapable of working. They have dropped out of the workforce. And of course, that adds to income inequality. So what we have to do is take steps to begin to get our economy growing again. And let me just give you, Dr. Garassi talked about some of the programs we put in place to try to turn around New York State's economy. When I came to office, 1 in 11 of every resident of this state, from Montauk Point to Buffalo, was on welfare. We were dead last in the country in creating jobs. When I left, we had over 1 million fewer people on welfare. We had almost 700,000 more private sector jobs, and we had a state where the economy was something that people could look to with optimism. And let me just give you a couple of solutions that I believe we should be looking at when it comes to jobs. First of all, this is a rich country, and I don't mean it in terms of dollars and cents. I mean in terms of resources. What has happened over the last decade with the technological ability to do offshore drilling, to have hydrofracking creating massive new amounts of natural gas and oil that are drawn domestically. These are industries that hire tens of thousands of not necessarily college graduates in blue-collar jobs that pay very well, often six-figure incomes. And yet now we can't drill offshore. In New York State, we're the only state I'm aware of where we have a moratorium that's lasted for now 5 years on accessing shale gas. You go across the border, there are 80,000 great jobs in Pennsylvania, blue-collar jobs of people developing that gas resource that is used here in Pennsylvania and America. In New York, of course, there's zero. We have the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, that for whatever stupid reasons politically is being blocked year after year while the studies continue. And the national head of the laborers union yesterday said this is a political disgrace. We will have 10,000 laborers' jobs when that pipeline is built, and we will have more North American oil. Well, the pipeline is going to be built, but it's going to go from Canada to British Columbia and then taking the oil and gas to Japan, because we politically are incapable of creating these blue-collar jobs because of government paralysis. The extraction industry, the timber industry, the resources we have should be generating tens of thousands more jobs today than they are, but because of politics, it doesn't happen. The second thing that we should be investing in is infrastructure. Whenever I come to Staten Island and I'm stuck somewhere on a decrepit highway or a bridge where there's permanent construction and it never seems to be solved, you just can't help but say, you know, this is the 21st century, this is the United States of America, and we have an infrastructure that is unfit for many of the countries that should be envying the United States. I'll just give you one example of something I'm working on. There is technology that Japan has deployed. It's operational in Japan today. Maglev Railroad. I have ridden their train. That train goes 320 miles an hour, smoothly, safely, taking people from one community to another. We're working to bring that from Washington, D.C. to Midtown Manhattan. Do you know what we could do with that technology? We could have this train that takes people from downtown Washington to Midtown Manhattan in an hour and 5 minutes with 6 stops in between. From downtown Philadelphia, it would be 24 minutes to Midtown Manhattan. The technology is here. The Japanese government is interested in working with the United States government to make this happen. We just had an over $800 billion bogus stimulus program, an infrastructure program, and I don't know what they did other than put up signs saying this pothole is being filled as a result of the Recovery Act. Well, $800 billion, we could have built that rail line from Washington to New York 10 times over, and we did nothing. We need to have an intelligent infrastructure investment program that creates jobs, that attracts private sector investment, and in the process allows us to really develop the 21st century infrastructure that would move this country forward. You know, I mentioned my grandparents worked in factories, my father worked in a factory, my uncles and cousins worked in a factory, I worked in a factory over the summers and Christmas vacation. Those were always great jobs. Tremendous jobs, particularly for people that don't have a college degree, or people whose English might not be that good because they just came here or their parents just came here. It is tragic that we do not today have jobs being created across this country building things that we want and the world needs. Today, as anybody in business knows, United States companies have $2 trillion in profits stashed overseas. $2 trillion sitting there that they could use to dramatically expand the United States economy, but they don't bring it back for one simple reason. And what is that? Taxes. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. We are one of the only companies that insist that if you earn money in Germany, but you're an American company, you have to pay American taxes. And let me just give you an example. If you're Apple making an iPhone, and you're competing with Samsung making an iPhone, Samsung has a factory in Ireland, they pay 12.5% income tax. If you have that factory in the United States because you're Apple, you pay on average 39% income tax. You are at this huge 27% disadvantage in a global economy. So what do? They build the factory overseas, they make profit overseas, and they don't bring it back because they would be taxed to smithereens. So it sits there waiting to be invested overseas again. Let's straighten out our tax code. Let's have a zero tax on manufacturing, because I'd rather have people working in a factory at a job in the United States with us getting the benefit of their employment than having a company building a factory overseas where we get absolutely nothing. And finally, I could talk all night, and you probably have already heard too much, but just one other point. In the 21st century, employers need higher skilled workers. Wagner does a tremendous job, not just with your business students, but all of your students are going to come out of Wagner, and you're going to be prepared to go out and doors will open, opportunities will arise. It's your job to work hard and take advantage of that opportunity. But not every American has the chance to go to a Wagner. There are a lot of students who don't. But almost every student would have the chance to go to a community college. And not just to get a degree, but if we connected those community colleges with the employers in the communities where that college exists, we could work cooperatively to elevate the skill set of our students to meet the needs of our companies and our employers. A study this week came out so that the cost differential between manufacturing in China and manufacturing in the United States, apart from taxes, is now only 4 cents on the dollar. We elevate the skills of our workers, and we will be able to tell all those companies that built a factory in China, you made a mistake. America is the place where you should have built that factory, and we would have had jobs here. I just want to close, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but it's kind of surprising for me as a Republican that I've talked this long and I never mentioned Obamacare, Harry Reid, or Nancy Pelosi. And if I were a Democrat, I didn't mention John Boehner or Newt Gingrich or the Tea Party. That's Washington. That's pointing fingers. That's not trying to solve problems. That's trying to cast blame and win an election. It's not America. America is what we saw here September 11th. America is people coming together, putting aside petty differences and understanding we have so much more in common than that which divides us. The American people don't have those divides. The American politicians do. It's up to you to get more involved, not to point fingers, but to solve problems. And then we can again be a country where we have great confidence in our future, and we know that our children and grandchildren will lead better lives than we did. Thank you. It was an honor to have a chance to speak to you this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Maybe the mics up a little bit. We have microphones in each aisle, so please, if you have a question, I mean, I have 1,000 questions. I want to get started this question with your guest. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will come to this. My name is please say your name.
Hi, I'm Trevor Loveland. I'm currently a senior here. My question is about the decentralization of Wall Street. So recently there's been a lot of talk about big companies, especially the financial sector, moving out of New York City and to more tax-friendly places and more business-friendly places. As a former governor, how would you stop that? And is that a huge issue moving forward?
Trevor, it's a huge issue. And it's been a huge issue for some time. I remember when I took office in 1995, it was just when Fairfield County, Connecticut was becoming a place for hedge funds. And one or two major New York-based global banks said they were going to leave New York. And it wasn't just taxes, it was also crime, it was quality of life, but taxes and regulation were a large part of it. And we sat down and said, give us a chance, you can't do this. And we managed to, while I was governor, we cut taxes by $143 billion cumulatively over the time. We made us competitive tax-wise, working with Mayor Giuliani and then Mike Bloomberg. We dealt with the crime issue and this city became safe. And we basically were able to convince those companies to give New York another chance. But as Dick Grasso knows well, it was the second time we faced that. That was after September 11th. Everybody understands the human loss that we suffered that day. It was just awful. But the economic catastrophe that was looming, in many ways, would have lasted longer, except for those who still feel the losses, as we all did. The word then was decentralized. Lower Manhattan was the financial capital of the world, and we had all great institutions from around the globe concentrated in just a few blocks, centered around Dick's New York Stock Exchange. And the federal government and others were saying, you can't do that. You got to decentralize. You have to scatter. So there was enormous risk that companies would leave. And I remember talking to Ken Schnall, who was the head of American Express, on the Friday, he called me the Friday after the September 11th, which was a Tuesday. And he was the governor. We're having a board meeting on Monday, and they were in Lower Manhattan, right across the street from Ground Zero. And he goes, Governor, my board wants to leave. This is the second time we were right across the street from these horrible attacks. Our workers are worried. Our board is concerned. We're looking someplace else. And then Ken goes, but I'm a patriot, and I'm not going to run. And I need assurance that if American Express, obviously a symbol of the United States, stays and rebuilds across from ground zero, we will have the security we need. And I said, well, you know, the legislature is not in session. I'm just the governor, but let me tell you, Ken, you have my word, that whatever this state needs to do to make sure American Express is safe, we will do to keep you there. And that Monday, American Express had its board meeting, and Ken Chenault gave me a call and said, we're going to rebuild and stay in Lower Manhattan. And it was that type of spirit that allowed us to overcome that desire to decentralize. But what worries me now is New York State's taxes are too high. They are much higher than they were. And I can't tell you, you go to Fairfield County, Connecticut now, the number of hedge funds, the number of private equity funds, the number of others that are relocating. And it's not because they want to be close to the place where they can play golf. This is still the greatest city in the world. But because we have to be competitive economically. And it's not just competing with Fairfield County, Connecticut. Why is New York the financial capital of the world? We have competition today from London, from Hong Kong, and from Singapore. Those all have exchanges that are growing. So it's one thing for the politicians to say, oh, the 1% wait too much, the businesses don't pay enough. If we are not competitive, they're not going to stay. And we have to understand that in a global economy, unless we can tell those leaders that this is a place where you can not only have the synergy with other great global companies right here, you're going to be able to compete economically because our tax and regulatory structure are not going to drive you out of New York and not going to drive you out of America. So it's a very important ongoing fight. Some of the regulatory laws out of Washington have made it much harder. Companies now say, well, we'll list our company in Singapore or London because we don't want to go through all the regulatory requirements. We don't want to risk the trial lawyers bringing class actions. We don't want to risk the Attorney General suing our board if they don't like us. It's all these things combined in a competitive world, and sometimes the politicians don't understand that.
Hello, Governor. The American Legislative Exchange Council, often referred to as ALEC,
Right.
has been a proponent of numerous reforms at the state and local level that support corporate America. I was wondering if you would comment about ALEC as well as the Trans-Pacific Partnership Act.
Well, I'm kind of prejudiced because I was president of ALEC at one point. I was a member when I was a legislator, and then I became president after that. And I do think it is an excellent organization that understands the competitive nature of the world economically today and the need for states in particular to have policies that are pro-growth and pro-competitive. So I haven't followed them of late. I don't know any of their specific proposals, but it has been an organization that has fought, in my view, for the policies that we need.
And the Trans-Pacific Partnership Act?
Is that what the president was just over negotiating?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. We're seeing, I know there's a lot of global economic students. Look, the global economy, among other things, depends on two things. One is the assumption of peace, where you don't have violence between nations because it's pretty hard to have effective commerce if you're invading and fighting with each other. And the second is the respect for the rule of law. And I'm concerned that with the enhanced or expanded aggressiveness geopolitically of China, that countries are going to start to doubt the reliability of the United States. So this will be essentially a free trade agreement with Malaysia, South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, and I think a couple of others. And I think it's very important. I think it's disappointing that the president was unable to get that deal done on his last trip. I know part of it is that the Japanese want to protect their agriculture, but I also know part of it is that we have not been as aggressive as we should be in trying to propose those multilateral and bilateral trade solutions.
Please stand. Yeah, stand up.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
My name's Diane. I'm simple. My question to you as the politician is, years ago, why didn't they just lower the taxes? Years ago. I'm very simple.
Yeah, I think you're very smart. You call yourself simple, I think you're smart. And it's exactly what I tried to do. But to defend those who I disagree with, there are always enormous demands for government spending. And a lot of it is legitimate, a lot of it is important. I do believe government is too big, I think it's too expensive, I think it's too intrusive, and I think it should be shrunk and have less of an impact and control of our lives. And I think if you did that, you could reduce taxes. And as I said, when I was governor, we reduced taxes over 100 different times by a cumulative total of $143 billion. But a lot of political people don't see it that way. And let me just give you one example. When I was in the legislature, virtually every week, someone would come up asking for something. You know, we have this great program for this group, we need more money. We have this great program for another group, we need money. The programs are all legitimate. The programs are all valid. The needs are all real. The fact, though, is that the demands for revenue are never ending. You can always do more by spending more. And there's nobody coming every week to your office saying, don't spend more money on this, or don't spend more money on that. And you have to have I think, the sense of importance that you don't do that. And just one other example, you know, as President Grassi said when he introduced me, I had this passion for the environment. When I first got elected, and we preserved over 1 million acres of open space. When we first got elected, it was about 3 months into administration, and all the enviro groups who had been friends of mine came in and said, oh, this is great, you're now the governor, there's this property, Sterling Forest, for sale in Rockland County, you know, it make a great preserve, can you have the state buy it? And I said, no. And they were kind of stunned, and they go, well, why not? And I said, we're broke. We're taxing too much, we're driving jobs out, we're losing companies, and until we get the finances of this state straightened out, we can't do that. I'd love to, but we can't. And 2 or 3 years later, they had wanted me to buy, as governor, a small piece of Sterling Forest. 2 or 3 years later, they came back and said, well, Governor, it's still for sale. Can you buy this little piece? And I said, no again. And they looked at me kind of strangely and said, you said, you know, once you got the finances straightened out, and things would be different. I go, yeah, that's right. We're not going to buy that little piece. We're going to buy the entire property, that entire land. And we ended up preserving 20,000 acres, about a half hour from there. But the point is, I had to say no until we were able to cut taxes, balance the budget, and get the private sector to have the confidence to stay here and create jobs. If I had said yes that first time, they would have been happy. We would have done something good, but we would have lost job after job after job and faced a financial nightmare for another decade.
Thank you, I guess. You know, Staten Island has lost a lot of property recently, like a lot of land, and they're building a lot of houses. I don't know I think it's terrible.
Yeah. Well, I remember the Green Belt, and we worked very hard to make sure that was protected. And one of the things I remember about open space on Staten Island is Cardinal O'Connor. I was always bugging him because the Archdiocese had all this magnificent property. And he finally goes, Pataki, I got something you might be interested in. And we went down to see the Cardinal's summer residence at Mount Loretta, is it? Mount Loretta, right? The Brereton Bay, or just beautiful thing. And I remember some of the upstaters going, well, it's too expensive. You don't need to preserve open space in the city when you can do so much upstate. And I said, you haven't seen Staten Island, and you haven't seen that property. We're going to preserve it. So yes, there's been a lot of land lost, but we did our best to protect it too.
Back on the topic of how we're going to make New York State more business-friendly atmosphere, how do you feel Governor Cuomo's Startup New York program is going to get that done?
I try to avoid politics. I am not going to criticize my successor. I made a vow You know, I ran against his father, and we had a very contentious campaign, and not once in the 12 years that I was governor did he take a shot after me, and I'm not going to take one at Governor Cuomo. I did serve as the co-chair of his tax reduction commission earlier this year. We made a number of proposals. Some of those were adopted, and I think that's a good thing for the state. But I do think there's a lot more that needs to be done, and in particular, one of the problems I see it is that most small businesses pay personal income taxes. They don't pay a corporate tax. They don't have all these loopholes. They can't avoid taxes. It's a small business. It's your company. Those are where the jobs are created, and you get paid. You pay the highest personal income tax rate. Our personal income tax rate is way too high. And there are those who will say, well, if you look at a poll, it's a good thing to do. If you look at the economy of this state, it's a bad thing to do because it hurts jobs. And it's one thing to say, oh, we're going after the 1% of the rich. It's another thing not to have jobs because those companies understand they can do better in a different state. So I'm a great believer that when you tax too much, take away opportunity. And you don't take away opportunity from people who can move to Palm Beach where there's zero taxes, or companies that move to Texas. You take away opportunity from those who live in a community and can't leave that community. And those are the ones we have to think of.
My name is Tony Jones. I'm an undergraduate at Wagner College. And my question pertains to charter schools. So while you're a governor of New York City, you increased the graduation rate of high school students. And Mayor de Blasio has been speaking about closing charter schools in New York City. What's your opinion on it?
You know, I was the driving force behind enacting charter schools in the state, and I think it's been reported, so the fact that we have a Staten Island Advance reporter here isn't too bad. But I'll tell you how that happened. This was back in 1998. New York State had no charter schools. And I believe then, as I believe now, that to trap a child in a failed public monopoly school is immoral. And we have to give parents the choice to have a school that works. So I was fighting for charter schools, and we were a lonely band. Those who were beholden to the teachers union hated the idea of charter schools because they opposed them. And the suburban legislators from my party hated the idea that parents might take the kids from their schools and the property taxes go up, so they hated it too. So nobody wanted it. And we had a great charter school bill. And it was the end of the year, and the state constitution says that the legislators can't get a pay raise unless they enact it before the next legislature takes office. So this was like December, and they wanted a pay raise. And they said, I don't think you should have a pay raise. You're paid enough. But pass the charter school bill, and I can take another look. They passed the pay raise, and I said, on the 10th day, I'm going to veto the pay raise unless charter school law passes. Nothing. 8 days go by, 9 days go by, 10th day, around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I get a call. Can we talk? So that night, the charter school bill passed, and I signed the bill giving the legislatures a pay raise. But that was the beginning. I believe in charter schools for a number of reasons. One is it's competition. 2, it's a public school. And 3, you can close them down. And we opened some charter schools that worked great, and they're still going. We opened some charter schools that failed, and we shut them down. And that's what you should do. Not just with charter schools, but any public school. If that school is failing children year after year, shut it down. And give the children and their parents the opportunity to go to a school that works. So I'm a great believer in charter schools. Only 50,000 New York, or maybe 70,000 New York City kids go to charter schools. I think we need a lot more, but I also think we need to fix the broader public school system. And part of the idea of charter schools was to try different models. Some would work, some would not. But the idea was those that would work would catch on, and the policies, the programs would be followed in other public schools. Sadly, that has not happened, but I hope it does and that this movement continues to grow.
To expand upon my question,
Sure.
what is the determining factor in a successful charter school versus not successful?
Well, I think, first of all, the demographics are important, and we make sure that, I think in New York City, 97% of the students in charter schools are minority kids, and generally from low-income families, because you don't want to take the best kids or the kids with the strongest educational commitment from their parents out of the broader public system. So that part is important. And the second is then, you have to have accountability. And one of the things we implemented was testing at the 4th and 8th grade. And you can see whether or not the students are performing or not just in comparison to other students in their class, but to other schools. And if one school is overperforming, another school is underperforming, you have to take a look at why that's the case. And we had some charter schools that just drastically underperformed. They were closed down. But if you look at the numbers, the overwhelming majority of charter schools are doing better than the public school system at large. But you have to continue to monitor it. You have to continue to make sure that it's working. But you can do that.
Good evening, Governor.
So,
My name is William Richard. I'm currently executive of the MBA program. I was also a former member of College Republic in the state of Illinois. One of the questions I have for you is I work for a specialty pharmaceutical company, and ever since Obamacare came into the picture, all these big pharmaceutical companies who maybe generic brand products are basically buying over all these mid-sized to small-sized specialty pharmaceutical companies. So is there a plan from the Republican Party to actually protect this small, mid-sized pharmaceutical company who are specialized in certain areas?
I think it's broader than that. You know, the problem you point out is a very real problem. But as I think the whole world has seen, there are many ongoing problems with Obamacare. Just, I think it was Friday or yesterday, the state of Oregon gave up and shut down its exchange after $300 million because it didn't work. And a number of other states are abandoning their exchanges. I fear what is going to happen to healthcare premiums over the next couple of years. And to me, what is sad is the president correctly identified two problems in our healthcare system. It was too expensive, and too many Americans didn't have access to decent healthcare. Not low-income Americans. They had things like Medicaid and Child Health Plus. But there was a better solution, and we did it in New York. We created a program to lower health insurance costs and to provide coverage. We created Family Health Plus, where low-income working New Yorkers who were above the Medicaid threshold but were working could get comprehensive health care at very low cost. And then we created something called the Empire State Health Plan, where individuals or small groups could pull together, buy a health care plan subsidized by the state that was very low cost. And they were working very well, and they've been undone. They almost have been disbanded because Obamacare has moved them out of the way with this centrally run program. So you have pointed out one issue, one of many problems with that law that I think are very real. I don't know that there's a specific solution proposed for that, but I do know there are alternatives and solutions proposed to try to fix the entire mess that I fear we're in right now in healthcare.
Hi, Anthony, senior accounting major here at Wagner. I know you touched on this earlier, but more specifically, I know that one of your primary focuses was and still is on cutting property taxes. Now, with that being the state's highest form of tax revenue, what would be substituted for that revenue flow, or will programs be cut because of that?
Well, I don't think you could simply eliminate the property tax and replace it with another tax. As you said, what is generated by property taxes is very high. It's not generated to the state. The state gets zero of the property taxes. But where the property taxes go is to fund local governments and to fund schools. And our primary method of funding schools in the state is the property tax. And that's something that I tried to fix, and we created the STAR program, the School Tax Relief Program, where we took state funds and used them to reduce the school property taxes of people based on income. And the program still exists, but it's a lot smaller than it was when I started. And the other thing that was done by the governor and legislature, which they deserve credit for, was to cap the increase in property taxes at 2%. That is a very real positive start, but we need to do more. There's no question about it.
Hi again, how are you? I just want to say I'm very impressed with you because of the question and answer. And you don't even have it ahead of time, our questions. I once went to a rally, gave a list of questions to ask Mayor Bloomberg. Why a City Human Rights Commission gave my employer 3.5 years extensions to answer ADA violations. They scooped me up, put me in the maid's car and sent me home and wouldn't let me ask the questions. When I reported it to Mayor Public Advocate de Blasio, I did after 9 months, I'm still waiting for an answer. Let's just say I did a FOIL, it said don't answer any of Diane's questions. Then he filed a false report that I spitted him, sent 3 cops tell me to drop all complaints. Now, I'm a person with a disability. Only after I reported the head surgeon to Staten Island Hospital, suddenly they bring in my epilepsy to say I had a verbal deficit. Do I?
You sounded very articulate to me.
Okay. My thing is, you have all these laws the problem is no one enforces them in a timely manner. 4 years I was forced to wait. And by the way, taxes I finally won. I was supposed to get 100,000. Let's just say I only got 59, so how much tax is that? That's ridiculous.
Well, I'm glad you finally won. And,
No, they owe
even
me.
if it's a partial victory. And all I can say is that
Okay, so
government is imperfect. Government is us. It's people. And sometimes it runs well, sometimes it doesn't run as well as you should. And the most important thing for a leader and an elected official is to have good people around you. And I really tried to do that. And by and large, we did. And I think the mayor, Mayor Bloomberg, was a very good mayor. I'm sorry he's no longer the mayor. I'm sorry that you had this incident and it didn't work out. But hopefully, as you continue to pursue it, and you are very articulate, it will be resolved intelligently.
Sure. Thank you, Governor. A quick question about the state and local government unfunded liability that's growing every year, and your thoughts on what we can do about it. I mean, I know the problem is somewhere between as bad as Detroit and whatever it is, but there has to be something we can do about that collectively.
Yeah. It is a major, major concern. You know, everybody, or most people are aware that the federal deficit now is around $17 trillion. What they're unaware is that the unfunded liability, that's just the deficit where the federal government has to borrow because it spends more than it makes. But the unfunded liabilities is more like 86 to 90 trillion dollars because of things like Medicaid and Social Security and Medicare, where the federal government says, oh, you're going to have health care, oh, you're going to have benefits, but the money's not there. And it's a very, very terrible concern. In New York State, one of the things I was really proud of is that our pension system was 100% funded. In fact, we were over 100% funded until September 11th, when the stock market fell, as Dick well knows, right before, because of the dot-com bubble, and then the aftermath. For a while, we went below. But we were 100% funded, and I think New York State's pension is still 100% funded. And of course, the major unfunded liabilities are federal, for things like Medicare and Social Security. So Washington has to get its act together. They have to start, you're going to get me ramped up here. You know, this country, and I think again to my grandparents and my parents, it's always been about one generation sacrificing for the next. That's what America's always been about. When people came here 200 years ago, the streets weren't paved with gold. When people came here 100 years ago, my grandfather worked in a factory 6 days a week, 10 hours a day for $1 a day. But he didn't do it because he loved working in a factory 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. He did it because he thought his children and grandchildren would have a better life. And that's always been America. And when you look at what is happening today, government is stealing from our kids and our grandchildren, living beyond its means today. It's the first time in history that a generation is stealing from the next generation to live beyond its means. It has got to stop. And there's no simple way to stop it other than having leadership that understands it's morally wrong and it's financially going to devastate the future of this country.
My name is Anthony Brzanka. Thank you for taking my question. My question revolves around, and you spoke about it earlier when you spoke about jobs being shipped off to China, factory jobs, but within the information technology field, I mean, Wagner graduates terrific, IT people ready to get into the business, and there's nothing there for them. Every job has gone over to India or wherever, and something is just not right. I've watched it happen, our friends up in Ormond, I've seen them do it, and I've seen entire companies, the employees wiped out. Go to a floor and there's nobody left. All the work is gone. How do you stop this?
You have to stop it by creating, you're absolutely right. Companies are going to act rationally in their own interest, just as people act rationally in their own interest. When a company understands they can get something a lot cheaper in India than they can in the United States, they're going to do it. And what we have to do is make the United States more competitive. And you mentioned the company in Armonk, and I assume you mean IBM. And I work very closely. By the way, one story in IBM. Before I took office, I went around and met with every major employer in New York State, and I met with the head of IBM, and I'm sitting in their offices in Westchester, and they roll out this map, and they go, here's our world headquarters, this is the land we own, this is a blue line, what do you think the blue line is? And I go, I don't know, it's a stone wall or something. And they go, that's the Connecticut border. We all live in Connecticut. The taxes are not lower. You tell us why we're building a new world headquarters. We shouldn't build it on that side of the line instead of this side of the line. That was before I took office. I was, to make a long story short, they built it on the New York side of the line. But we worked with IBM. And if you go to Albany today, you talk about IT, the most advanced nano center anywhere in the world, believe it or not, is in Albany, New York. There are right now 4,000 IT professionals, 4,000 lab technicians, PhDs, working on pure research in a nano center that has attracted investment from every single major global company. And I'll never forget, I got to visit, and there was Intel and Tokyo Electron. They hate each other. They're brutal competitors. And what we did was research today in IT and nanotechnology and so much is extraordinarily expensive. There is one computer etching tool that costs $85 million. And that one tool, and the state said, we will put in capital to start up for research, but it has to be matched 3-for-1 by the private sector and the university sector. And to make a long story short, today, there is this $85 million computer etching tool. There's a glass wall, and on one side is Intel, and on the other is Tokyo Electron. With thousands of jobs in upstate New York. You have to compete, you have to create the right economic climate, you have to have the quality workforce, like having an IT degree from Wagner, and you can't simply say, we give up, it's going to go there. This is America. If we put our mind to it, we can outwork and outcompete anybody, but we need the right political leadership.
My last?
Yes.
Well, Governor, first let me thank you for coming to Wagner tonight and say how privileged I feel, and I think everyone in this audience shares that feeling of your warmth and your openness and your leadership. I should ask a question, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to do is address this audience. The governor did a brilliant analysis of what's wrong with politics in this country. Come 2016, a radical on the left or a radical on the right is going to be the nominee. And we are going to just dig the hole we are now digging even deeper with the hope of reaching China, not to bring back jobs. Okay, but because people who are not smart enough to know that when you're in a hole, the first thing you want to do is stop digging. I was privileged to be CEO of the New York Stock Exchange for 8 years. All of those years, we had a great governor. A governor who understood that someone who agrees with 70 or 80% of your beliefs can never be your opponent. In the same spirit as Ronald Reagan. This governor brought the state and the city and the resources and the people together after 9/11 and made the city and state work again. I would encourage all of you to listen to what the governor said on that political histogram, okay? Because 2016 is going to be our last shot at correcting a very, very dangerous path that this country is going down. Fiscally, from a political, if you will, unity standpoint, we have never been more divided. And what we need is not a radical on the left or a radical from the right. We need someone who is able to work that middle. And if you have any ideas, I have an idea. I think we have the right man in the room right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Dick, for helping arrange this. We have this wonderful gift for you. I'm going to open this gift because I want to show you this gift. I'm not supposed to do that, but I didn't want to do just, something from Wagner that you sit on, you put in your closet and never look at again. We wanted to give you something which we think represents who you are. So this is a beautiful glass rendering of the American flag in its full glory. And at the very bottom is Governor George Pataki, 2014 Presidential Economic Symposium. Thank you.